Good afternoon, and we're still inside, and hopefully everyone is being safe. And we want to welcome you to our community meeting and want to remind you that we will be having our fourth quarter transparent meeting in December. So we are still holding them. Um, as you know, slides up. Can you do
All
the
right.
slide up?
Yep, slides coming
Oh,
up.
okay. We've been working at this for over 15 years, and we have been talking with the community and in the community, and we have did research and talked to people in other parts of the country. One of the things that we looked at last year was the alternative to calling the police. And we said, well, what was that all about? And with that, we did have a small group um, at that meeting, and we got started talking about it, but then it wound up being a conversation about around race. So that's one thing with us. If the people in the group in the room have a topic or issue that they feel is compelling and need to be addressed. So that was one of the things that we addressed in connection with calling the police, calling the police. And the Citizen Network of Protection, as you know now, we are a 501c3 organization that is here to assist residents in filing their complaints against the uh, police department, officer rather, and also with um, issues that they might have with different city department, and we help them in looking at how to address those disputes. Um, and I will make so. And tonight we are going to be looking at why should we be looking at alternative to call the police. You know, what is the purpose of looking at that? We will be going through some slides that will be addressing different issues and looking at maybe at that point we should not have called the police. Neil will take us through the next 7 slides, and then I will pick up, and then Neil will come back in. And once we have gone through all of the slides, we will come back to start to have a community discussion. So that's why we are asking you to these. The community, our meeting on Tuesday are about having discussion with the community. We're not saying you got 3 minutes, but to have a discussion with you. So, Neil,
All right. So
thank you.
why should we be considering alternatives to calling the police? Well, our current and hopefully to be former U.S. Attorney General Barr has said that in many communities, our officers must confront a wave of social problems such as homelessness, drug addiction, mental illness, problems that demand solutions beyond the authority and expertise. And this was in reference to a presidential commission to law enforcement that happened earlier this year. Basically, him saying that our officers take on more tasks now than they ever have. Here's another reason why we should consider alternatives to police. Northwestern University recently completed a study where it found that 1 every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by the police. That's not a good enough reason. If you are mentally ill and have the police called on you, your death is 16 times greater than otherwise. So someone who has a treated mental illness is a safer victim to the police. But if you have untreated mental illness and the police are being called on you, the likeliness of death is extremely high. So let's talk about our mayor and police chief. They did a review of 911 calls last year, and they found the leading complaints were parking complaints. We're talking about 911. Followed by accidents, well-being checks, and nuisance complaints. So Mayor Haggerty said, why are we having officers respond to incidences of leaf blower usage outside the legal times? There's no reason to have an armed guy showing up to deal with a leaf blower. So there's plenty of different areas and arguments to be made for why there should be an alternative to police. Number one, it ties up police with non-threatening complaints. Leaf blowers are not dangerous to someone's life. And you also have to consider when you bring an officer into your community, you're putting people at risk when you do that. When should you call the police, though? This is the big general question here. And we agree, there are times that the police need to be called, particularly when someone's life is at risk and there's harm coming to them. That's pretty much the only time it's a good time to call the police.
And there are questions that we will be asking, like, do you believe someone is in danger? Call the police. The next question we would have is, move to the next slide, please.
It should have moved.
Okay, why do you consider something suspicious? And what outcome can you expect with police intervention? And
So
what outcome can you? That was the last one. Then we move to theft of personal property. That's something that none of us wish to happen, but that's something that happened. It's a daily report of the blotter report that certain personal property have been stolen. So, well, no one like having things taken from them. That is no reason to bring an armed police officer into the community. 9 times out of 10, depending into which community they might come, it might just be one patrol car, two officers. In certain communities, especially communities of color, you will have two patrol cars, four officer, and maybe another one would come and you have five officers. So that's kind of overkill. So we have to look at, do we need to call the police or just go to the police department and file the complaint? Because if you file an insurance claim, they just want to see that you talked to a policeman and took the report and gave you a copy of um, the next one. So someone experiencing car trouble. Well, we all have had car trouble if you own a car in your life, and then you had to have someone to help you push it across, and you hope that, okay, this would happen and it would go easy. And some, depending on, well, hope the police don't come or don't need to be answering a whole lot of questions that they might be asking. Well, why is your car out of gas? If that's what it might be. Uh, did this little red light in your car came on, and you looking at, why are you asking me about the lights? My car is stopped and I need to get out the street. Help me move my car to the side. And so sometimes that goes very smoothly. But then sometime again, it escalates into a issue of the person being charged with disorderly conduct, disobeying the police officer. They writing a ticket, taking her to jail, calling the tow truck, and the truck come and the person wind up paying $400. So you said that all I was just stopped on the side of the road and I need to be pushed to the side. But those are type of things that happen, and it's just kind of like with the respect that the police officer is not giving to the driver, and he just keep asking in questions and his tone to it aggravate the person, and you try hard as you can not to respond to escalate things, but they do happen. And then you'll wind up paying a fine, got a record down there, and a whole lot of others. So, but someone is in trouble. If we ask, can we help them and stuff, and then the police do not have to get involved. Uh, the next one we have is domestic dispute. We all have heard our neighbors, read stories, seen that, and so you try to intervene, and you have to be kind of careful with that. And that's something that we need to talk about, and there are groups that talk to you and how to help people that are in domestic dispute and stuff. So you at home and you hear this and stuff, and if you quickly can, or if you have a dish, if it's close to dinner time or after dinner time, and you knock on the door and say, "Oh, hopefully you know the person's name," and you said, "Mary, I know you, I saw you got home late, so I brought this dish for you and your family, and so that you can, and you don't have to go in the kitchen to cook and stuff, and I hope y'all enjoyed and you can bring the dish back." You're changing the conversation, and you are hopefully kind of de-escalating, give them time to calm down or to think about what it was that they was arguing about. We have here at the bottom a list of organizations and things that you can call that do have community outreach and programs where they talk to the people in the community for helping people when have issues of domestic uh, violence. Next one, uh, loud parties. Well, we all like the parties, at least I used to, and they can get out of hand, and you can, you know, call them, kind of remind them. I just want to remind you now, it's getting close to whatever the curfew time is for the noise, and you might want to, turn it down some before the neighbors cross the street or whatever start calling the police. You don't know whether it's a neighbor across the street that call the police or the one next door. but you kind of reminding them that there is a law and on the book that says you can't keep your party going after a certain time. And they might thank you and might invite you in. And you can say, well, uh, since I'm over here, get to know the people in your community, get to know the people next door and stuff. And it can be a situation that you strike up a friendship. So if something started, like the lady feel like, okay, this is not going to be a good thing, then she can leave her house to come to your house to talk and stuff and everything. So these are things that we need to talk about, think about before, and to put in place so that we don't always have to call the police. Because all the time, policemen come into your neighborhood, the response to those are not on a good measure. And you wind up having people hurt and stuff. And then nobody is happy. Everybody's upset. So we need to start making our community where we look at it and we says, we can do this thing and we can do these things to help control things in our neighborhood. And when it's absolutely necessary, we will call the police. But when it's not, we're not calling and we're staying safe. Uh, Next one.
Yeah. So this one is one that I would like to talk about. And but to reiterate on what Betty's talking about is there's the theme here. The theme is that we are all neighbors and this is a community, and that all actions can be dealt with, all conflicts can be dealt with, and not necessarily every single time requires police officer intervention. We as a community can work through our problems. We can work together to solve our problems. So speaking about problems, beer pong. Our alderman, Judy Fisk, believes that this is a problem that requires laws. And she cites a legal solution in Belmar, New Jersey. Belmar, New Jersey's prohibits games or contests that involve the element consumption of alcohol. And she believed that this is a good solution to stopping noisy Northwestern neighbors who are having fun on their own private property. So here's why it can go wrong. This is a review from 2011 from Belmar Beach, and it was about people of color being harassed because they were carrying cups that potentially could have had alcohol in them. And so it was used as an excuse to harass them. So with that said, let's reflect. Do we need to create more laws that allow people of color to be harassed? As Alderman Cicely Fleming of the Ninth Ward said, this is a slippery slope and unfortunately can open up to a lot of things. I think there's a term for this. It's called being a Karen. And, it exists, and giving people this type of ammunition to call the cops because there's beer pong being played in the backyard and maybe some kids are being loud versus going over there and engaging with them, asking them to quiet down, trying to find a happy medium somewhere. Who knows? You might get the next round. So it's just as a point of contention around the idea of we need to reduce the need to call the police, this type of law is kind of going the opposite direction. It's creating more danger for more people, and it is ripe for abuse. So with that said, think we are going to open this up and kind of kick off a little bit of a conversation, get some thoughts from people. You've seen a couple of examples that we've given you about alternatives to calling police in certain situations, property theft at home, disabled vehicle, neighbors in a domestic dispute, loud neighbors. These are all situations that we believe can be solved by the community, by being neighbors, by knowing your neighbors, and not something that necessarily requires armed intervention. Do people, anyone else have examples that they could think of? Traffic issues, dog issues, other situations to where we probably don't need to be calling the cops. Do we need to be calling the cops when there's dogs at the beach and not using the dog beach? Probably not. You could probably go over there and ask it yourself. So if anyone has a suggested issue or a suggested solution, raise your hand, unmute yourself if you can. Yeah, I think you can unmute yourself.
Okay, we are a quiet community. We have two things from the chat. One wanted to know if we could share the slides, and the other one asked,
HOA issues. That's interesting because fortunately, I don't think
it
Evanston
is, what
does.
is
Evanston have
HOA?
HOAs?
Yes, it says HOA. And what does that mean? You have to remember you're dealing with a senior that's not up with all of the.
So housing authorities, are there any?
Oh,
I mean, there's no planned communities in Evanston per se, so you're not going to get in trouble for leaving your trash cans out too long. But there are certainly disputes that can be made, like the leaf blowers, cops being called for people using leaf blowers in the wrong seasons. I know it's a law that we're not supposed to use gas-powered devices like this. I couldn't tell you the days. I couldn't tell you what times of year you're allowed to and not allowed to. So I would for sure get the cops called on me if I made that mistake. I shouldn't have the cops call on me though.
yeah, there is it. It's in the city code. Um, and we don't have a housing authority, but we do have a lot of city codes that deals with people in their house, in their homes and things, and what they can and cannot do. Like we have the nuisance ordinance. Now that one, most the state has a nuisance ordinance, which falls under the criminal thing. And what the city did with the nuisance ordinance added, talked about if there's a gang member living in your house, well, that can be grounds for the landlord to evict you. And then they have other ones. Oh, if you have a call, 2, 3 calls that is made to the police department, and they come out to your apartment because the neighbor called to say you was a nuisance, then that's ground for the landlord to evict you. And we're trying to get them to rescind that one, the whole nuisance thing, because it's just wide open for um really abuse of it.
So Christine has a question. Lives in the 8th Ward. So repeatedly heard folks calling the police to report something suspicious. And what can you say to folks in response to this? So I think that comes down to is what makes you feel it's suspicious? And is this something that you can address yourself? Do you feel that you are in danger by addressing it? And if so, can you bring neighbors in and get neighbors involved in the situation? Because there's rarely situations that you should feel like there's something suspicious happening in your neighborhood that you really can't get involved in. Sure, if someone's trying to jimmy a door open or something, that's a little bit more than just being suspicious. And that maybe is a situation that you probably don't want to call the cops or get involved yourself, and maybe you want to call the cops. But a lot of times you can walk up to them and go, hey, what are you doing? And if the person's still going to keep working on the door, well, maybe they have a reason. They lock themselves out. Or if they're extremely bold criminal, maybe you should let them go then, right? So the second question from Judy is, are there alternatives to calling, like a social worker? So this is something that City of Evanston is working on. I believe they're looking at alternatives to police for mental health issues. Over the summer, Mayor Haggerty had on one of the, first responders under the Cahoots program in Denver. Cahoots being a program where two social workers, not in police uniform, not in a police car, are arriving to deal with someone that's having a mental health crisis. What's been interesting is recently some research has come out. There are the two cities that this Cahoots was kind of invented in was in Oregon, in Eugene and in Springfield. They've been doing a Cahoots style program for over 15 years. And they've experienced less than 1% of the time, they experience that they actually have to call for backup. And financially, the cities on a year-to-year basis, they're saving $8 million from the police fund because they're able to have Cahoots first responders, non-armed responders showing up. So if that doesn't tell you that there are better ways of doing things that don't involve cops, I don't know what would. But to answer your question about do we have social workers that exist in Evanston that can respond today, I do not recall of an agency that does. Karen, do you have an answer to that? Hold on. Karen, you have to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. We have a neighborhood issue that's been ongoing, and what we were told to do by our alderman was to contact our PST officer, who would then tap into the appropriate city resources. And I think that that is an issue that needs to be addressed. The city needs to develop alternative resources for community members to call, because the default, and it has been for years, that back when officers were not so threatening, when I was a kid, you called the police for the kinds of things we're saying now are dangerous to call the police for. And I agree, they are dangerous to call the police for these kinds of circumstances. But right now, the way to alternative resources is still through the police. But I think calling the non-emergency number is a better idea than calling 911 if you do need resources, or calling 311.
I would agree with that. I would really try to avoid calling even the non-emergency police. There has to be resources that we can develop in Evanston to fill these needs, so we don't have to bring armed intervention into it. And
I agree with you, Neil, but until those resources are identified for people to reach out to, I believe it's better to call 311 than 911. Personal experience.
The question is, are we going to have 311 next year? So that's that's part of the whole equation here. So one of the themes that I had when we started researching alternatives to policing is really that none exist in Evanston. They're not around. And so if we want to be the progressive city that can identify ways to protect our community and help those that are in need, we really need to widen the aperture on what we can call first responders in Evanston. And so the idea of having a Kahoot style program here, I'm a big advocate of. I think having some sort of social workers that are not tied to the police, that do not show up in police cars, do not wear police uniforms, showing up to deal with situations where a person who's having a mental issue would feel that the situation is being escalated by seeing a cop car showing up, or by seeing a man wearing a bulletproof vest showing up. So by having someone in a t-shirt and jeans pulling out of a van, smiling, and just trying to bring help to that person is just a better way to move forward. And regarding things like disabled vehicles, sure, them being in the middle of the road is a dangerous situation. And in theory, calling the police to stop a dangerous situation is the right thing to do. But is there a possibility where you could stop what you're doing for 5 minutes and make the difference and get that person to the side of the road safely? Maybe that's what we should do. We need to really consider that we are all a part of a community, and just looking out of the corner of our eye going, oh, that's a shame, moving on, isn't the ideal way of living in a community. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
He has to unmute.
I just put some information in the chat. I know Cicely Fleming is just starting a committee with the city of Evanston, and it's called the Alternative Emergency Response Subcommittee. And the work they're doing is exactly what we're talking about here, looking into alternatives, a social worker type model that would be in a first responder type situation. And so I put it in the chat, and they do meet on Tuesdays via Zoom, and it's open to the public.
I really encourage everyone to go to these. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. It is important that we all give our 2 cents and what alternatives need to exist, because city council only responds when people talk to them. They don't operate in a vacuum. Yes, Sue, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself.
I went to that site from the city website to see if they were meeting today, because that's what I had put on my calendar. But in effect, they were not meeting today. And what I read was they meet irregularly. So to put it on your calendar for a Tuesday is fruitless unless you know they're actually meeting.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page there. All right, so Doreen, you were the first to raise your hand. All right, I'm going to be terrible at pronouncing his name. H-N-E-T-U, sir?
Kind of too.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead with your question. Oh, all right, Carolyn, I think you were next.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I actually did find the meeting this afternoon, and I attended that meeting from 3:30 to 4:30. The subcommittee meeting on the alternatives to policing.
Yeah.
It's like they're really trying to dig around and look for new resources or current resources and expand those functions.
Okay. Well, I look forward to being put on YouTube so I could watch it. Unfortunately, I work during the day. Christine, I think you were next. Christine, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I also attended the meeting this afternoon, and I plan to continue. I'm just wondering, I'm a social worker and I have some idea, but I wanted to hear from you or anybody else, what are best practices that we should be advocating for in the alternative emergency response?
Boy, just as a global question.
Well, I guess particular to our Evanston community.
Karen, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, the committee I was on that was trying to come up with best practices for police oversight, Matt Mitchell, who's on this meeting here now, was the chair of that committee. What we found in doing investigations is that there are not any agreed upon best practices nationally around reforming police. There are resources that are available that even apply. Well, CNP has surfaced these resources for years on a global basis from the UN and other global bodies. But what I think is a challenge for us, and something that I believe our Evanston community is fully up to, and that is identifying what would work best for our community. Because one reason best practices when it comes to police reform don't exist in the United States is because communities have unique characters and compositions and characteristics. So what's the best practice in, Los Angeles may not be a very good fit for a city like Evanston, for example. And that's why I think to Matt and others' points about this subcommittee that Cicely Fleming is leading is important to participate, to have, as again, CMP is having here, a community conversation about these things so that people can hear one another's thoughts, generate new ideas and so on. So sorry to say, I'm not sure that there are best practices, or even if there were, if they would fit.
Yeah,
We have,
to me though, I think we still go back to the same, which is someone in danger? Is this something that I can get involved in? It's about refocusing what we need the police for, and remembering that this is all about being a part of the community, and in part of the community means sometimes doing uncomfortable things, and that's like confronting a neighbor about something, so on and so forth. One thing that I don't know who watched the budget hearing last night, but one of the things that our city manager brought up was the fact that the police department really doesn't review the data they collect. They're collecting the data, but they're not looking into it. And I think if we want to talk about alternatives to policing, we actually need to look at what the police are doing. And so encouraging the City of Evanston and City Council to ensure that they have data people reviewing policing data and identifying issues from that data. That's how you find solutions. And you can only find solutions if you actually look at the data and find where the problems are. We know that there are problems. It's everywhere in the news, but we need to look at the data and figure out and prioritize what our needs are and what alternatives we need to create to fill those needs.
we have Hannah to on the to speak,
Yes.
and he was one of the individuals that worked with us when we was crafting this, discussing this. So he stayed with us as long as he could, and then he went off to something else. So Hannah, too, could we have your question?
Yeah, I had to change the setting. That's why when I was talking before, you couldn't hear. But anyway, for two things I'd like to comment on. I worked in South Evanston for a while, and I was in charge of Riva Brummel Elks Park. And I watched the gentrification happen. And what I watched was a number of people wanting to move into a neighborhood. And so they had to figure out how to get certain people out of that neighborhood. And so that's when the calls started being made, because they needed to change the landscape so it was comfortable for them to live in this particular area. And so we're watching a number of communities go through that. And so that's going to be an issue, because some people are going to say, I do not want to live next to these people. And so how do we get them out? Because right now it's an issue then that becomes saying, what is the value of the house that I buy here? Now, if I can buy it low and change the landscape, now all of a sudden my property may have increased like 10, 20 fold, so to speak. And all of a sudden now it's a great investment. But these people have to go. And so I watched that happen in Evanston, in South Evanston, to the point where all of a sudden, they took, say for instance, they took down the basket on one side of Reba Park, because when I counted at like 7 o'clock in the evening, there were 80 kids in the park. They already knew you couldn't cuss, you couldn't fight because I was gonna put you out. But they were sitting there watching basketball, playing games, and doing other stuff. And that was a complaint.
Yep.
Because there was too many kids in the park having fun. Because the intent was, we want that building next to Reba Park turned from condos, from apartments to condos, and we don't want that element there. And as of now, they're trying to change that into a tennis court. They don't want a basketball court there because it attracted the wrong kind of people. So it depends on what kind of neighborhood that you're in when it comes to this call making and intervention, because when it comes down to people's properties and the pricing of those properties, some people are like, I don't care what they're doing. These people have to go because this is an investment for me. I'm going to stay here 5 years and then I'm going to move. But I can't make any money if I stay here and I don't get those people out. And so I see that happen, and you know it happens across America. So some of this happens because of that. Now, a while back, I tried to work with Brother Ronnie and a few other people, because I was trying to set up a council within the 2nd and the 5th wards to say, okay, we have a problem. We strategically pick people, train them, or get some training so that we can go and say, okay, this happened. They know you can call this person gets on the phone and talks to that person, and they start going to talk to families. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact, because I made some of the calls when the old GDs were about to fight the young GDs, and we squashed that and didn't have to call the police. There was no gunplay that was going to happen, none of that. Those things can especially in Evanston, things like that can actually happen if you put the right people in place and give them the training to say, this is how you're going to have to go and talk to them. All I did was make a couple phone calls and said, this is the situation, this is what happened. I need you to go talk to this individual. I went and talked to the other individual. The guns that were being amassed were once dispersed again. The fact is, unfortunately, is they had the guns, but it didn't come about because they realized that the whole thing came about because one man was sleeping with another woman, and she didn't like it. So she sent her nephew to go out and do something to this individual, and it was going to be a fight. It really was. But what I'm saying is, this can actually be a very good thing for the community, where we have ties to one another and we're constantly in contact. And when something happens, the community knows this is the number that you call for this particular person that's in your area or your family member. And they get on the phone and start exchanging information that you need to go talk to this person, you need to go talk to that person. It takes a while to set up, but it's not going to take that much. I know personally, in the 2nd and the 5th ward, it's not. Even in 8th ward on the south side, because some of us know so many different people where it can happen like that. And I understand we're talking about, a car gets stopped and this, that, and the other. I'm actually looking at bigger issues that need to be curtailed, that I see. I work at Evanston Township, that I see go on in the school that need to stop. And it can be stopped. There's individuals in the building that can do it. I mean, they have Stacy and some other people out there working in the community already that can actually do a little bit more than what they're doing if they're given that latitude to go out and do that. But I don't think they are. I mean, they got rid of Kevin, who was actually trying to facilitate that. And so that becomes a problem, because that's what he was trying to do, is to set up that kind of network to say, we need to stop this. And so there's two things happening at the same time. There's things going on inside the community, and then there's people that are trying to say, you know, we want to take back certain communities from certain individuals. And so both of those have to be addressed as we talk about how do we deal with not calling the police, because we got to figure out why are they trying to call the police and what's the real intent.
Solid, man.
Thanks.
That was great. Now, Betsy, I think you had a question or comment? Oh, mute button.
Thanks. I had a couple comments. I think, and I'm sorry, Betty told us how to pronounce your name, Mr. Seiss, and I missed it. But I think your points were fantastic. I think sometimes that feels a little overwhelming for folks who don't know, who are more introverted and don't know everybody around. But I do think it's a really great point that, you know, our community is not nearly as scary as we sometimes think. And so there's a level of intimidation, a bit, you know, stopping to check on, stopping to observe police stops, stopping to help people with their cars, stopping to intervene in what look like they could be potential altercations. There's great bystanders, you know what I mean, the intervention trainings that can help us develop some confidence. But some of it is just, you know, most of the folks on the meeting are my age or so. And, you know, once we get older, we have some privilege where we can exercise to jump in and just by our presence, de-escalate things. Anyway, the other aspect that I think is super important, especially for folks like me who live in the first ward, is that we express to our council reps that we want there to be less police intervention. You know, with talking to Judy about things like student housing and beer pong and nuisance arrests, you know, she hears from me a lot and she knows what I'm going to say, but she also hears from a whole bunch of rich white folks who live up and down the first ward who are saying you need to have new laws to bring the police in to deal with these additional nuisance offenses. And she needs to know, not only from the folks on this call, but also from your neighbors and your friends, that this isn't something that the community wants. I think we tend to be quiet if we're not dealing with an immediate problem. And if they're not hearing from the alternative viewpoint, all that they know is that the neighbors next to the student housing want the beer pong shut down. So we need to be not only talking to our council reps ourselves, but also engaging our neighbors in our communities to make sure that they're hearing from an alternative viewpoint. Oh, the one other thing that I wanted to mention, Betty, I noticed on your slide, you had the great point about not necessarily going into the police department by yourself. There's a lot of risks for folks about showing up in the police department. I'm sure I'm not the only lawyer on this meeting, but I would be happy to act as a buddy or accompany people who need to go into the police department to report property crimes for insurance or for any other reason, because it really is, it's safer to go in with somebody else. And so I'd encourage y'all to reach out or send people to me if there's folks who need that help.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you, Betty.
Doreen, did you wish to speak?
Well, I'm not good at names. And the person who spoke before about abuse of complaints to basically make someone uncomfortable and leave. is not unique to your ward. And I'm in the 7th ward. And I was in a situation where the police solutions team, when I said, well, geez, I said, I have this neighbor who's complaining all the time and I don't want to escalate. And I kind of want to get a place where I can like work together. And in the past, the police solutions team, before some of these recent changes where we hear the chief talking in a way that's a little different than he was talking before about community policing. And so things have changed in terms of community policing emphasis to the police solutions team, or maybe this was just a different group of police solutions team. But I was totally astounded when they told me that with regard to the issue that I wanted to peacefully resolve, come out and see it, and then, try to get a way to work with my neighbor and not, escalate it. I was told to make a complaint against my neighbor, find something about this situation, like a code thing, and then have someone examine or inspect. And I'm thinking, how is that a solution? All it's going to do is escalate. That was the most horrible. I decided not to do that. And I was astounded that a solutions team would take the risk of escalating a bad situation. So that's why I'm saying, and there's so many other things. This particular topic, I wish we talked more about it, because it's really the abuse of code. It can be as serious as actually putting someone in jeopardy of losing their home. So we have to really, 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 really look at this, even maybe a second meeting with lawyers, more lawyers, and the force of wanting to have things work out. We really have to convince the city that it's in their best interest to operate that way. So it's much bigger than the police. Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Matt, did you have something to say?
I did. The city of Evanston had an alternatives to arrest committee, which had some good ideas, but I think the standard response for communities of not arresting people is to go back to like a broken windows policy where you end up ticketing and fining. And the last person who spoke kind of mentioned how though that type of city enforcement can really get people down. You can get your license suspended. You can get, the city can take your state tax returns. So I'm really not in favor of trying to replace criminal justice with a broken windows policy that just uses economic leverage over people. And what I'm interested in is the gentleman who was talking before, about what Kevin Brown and the young adult and youth services team does is proactively going into the community and having that outside of the police department. What if you had a conflict with a neighbor and called a community mediator instead of a community police officer who shows up armed and is much more likely to escalate and is much more likely to respond to something that they're not called about. They see a little bit of marijuana, or they see whatever minor criminal thing that really isn't the problem. So I would love to see Evanston be more proactive in kind of community mediation as opposed to police enforcement.
Yes, Hannah too. No, Honey too has his hand raised. I guess you have to unmute him. Or does
Yeah.
it-
Okay, there we go. A couple things. Not at one time I worked on the outreach department when it was under the police station. Kevin wasn't there yet. It wasn't under Kevin's jurisdiction or auspicion, whatever. And so I worked on that particular program for like a summer. And there's some things that were going on, and it was like, you know what? I need to go. I realized that then. And so I got out. As a matter of fact, we had just finished the complaints thing for the city of Evanston, and all Alderman Baptiste at that particular time asked me to sit on it, and Chief Eddington said, no, he's not the kind of person that can sit on it. So, you know, that eliminated me. But at the same time, let me say this, because there's like an elephant in the room, and it has to be dealt with. And I don't know if everyone knows it or wants to deal with it, but you have to look at the reason that the police were created and why they were created. And it started as slave patrols. And their goal was to do what? Keep Africans Americans, Black folks out of white neighborhoods. And if you look where they're at, for the most part, they're still doing the same thing. That has not changed. And so until we change that narrative of what their job is, and from my understanding, their job is not to, if they're sitting and watching a crime, their job is not to actually stop the crime, it's to arrest you after you commit it. And some of them actually take that literally because they want to lock people up. You know, they freed the slaves, and then they came up with vagrancy laws and said, but you're free with the 13th Amendment, but we can put you back in slavery because now you committed a crime and you're going to jail. Well, some of that attitude has not changed. I mean, as soon as Obama got elected, what happened? The number of white supremacist groups went what? Sky high. Yeah. I mean, 70 million people tried to vote Trump in. That tells you that this is not changed. Even though some states have changed from red to blue, they only wanted to vote Trump out. They're going back to red because they got him out. But we still have that issue. And so that, for me, that's the elephant in the room of what is policing's intent? And we're going to have to somehow deal with what is their intent and how do we deal with that, because there's going to have to be some training that's going to need to be done to say we have to change the mentality of the police officers that are going in to do these kinds of tasks. When I sat there and asked Chief Eddington one day before we actually got started in the meeting, I said, Chief Eddington, do you understand why we're trying to put this together? And he said, no, I don't. I said, because we need to be protected from the people that we call protecting us. And he took grave offense to that. I haven't seen him since these videos and the cameras came out to ask him, do you understand what I'm saying right now? Because it's still going on, because the attitude of what are police's jobs and what they're supposed to do, it's still there.
Thanks, Hunter, too. One of the things that in growing up, I grew up, have lived in different cities and stuff. I've lived in 2 cities that, well, 3. One of them where the policeman was more or less mandated to stay in the community and everything. But I lived in 2 small communities where the policeman lived in the community, and they was your neighbor and stuff. And with them being there, it helps. Those neighborhoods felt safe. The people felt safe because they saw them as part of the community, part of the neighborhood, working to make things better, to improve whatever was going on the um, in the community. And they have this thing that they say, well, the policemen can't live in Evanston because they can't afford it. And I'm like, and I'm looking at their salary and what most of the people that lives here in this city are uh, get and pay for rent and stuff, and they say they can't live here. No, they don't want to live here because I can live outside and have more disposable money. So it's about money, because we look at Evanston. Evanston has I guess, an attitude in a different segment of the communities and stuff. You have those, well, you have the haves, the have-nots, and in the middle. And Evanston sees itself as being one that is not really dealing too much with the issue of low income people or poor people. But then, and you ask yourself, why aren't they? Because Evanston has funds that come into this city that they do not use properly, and that is called the Community Development Block Grant. They get close to $1 million a year from that, from HUD. So they get that, plus they get a quarter of half a million for the homes funds. So these funds are given to the city and supposedly to help people that is low income. That is, that are 50% below the poverty level. So you have the AMI and you have people that instead of mid-level, this year was 79,000 for a family of four. So what you got the money because you have 50% of the residents in your community that is below that. And then you look at, well, what are we doing? How are we treating the people? And we start doing the 4 year. It's like Karen says, you can do a 4 year and get the information from the police department. And no, they don't. The police department nor the city government is looking at what their police department is doing because you have numbers that saying we are paying you and we are not really taking care of the people that we are supposed to be serving and help serving. Because at times you cause more trouble in those neighborhoods with those people, and you don't want to take care of them. And we see on the news where we hear in Chicago where the policeman goes into houses, busts down doors and things, and don't have any warrants. Well, we have that here in Evanston. It doesn't get on the news. Nobody really talks about it. They um, look at it and they have a tendency to fear the policeman. And our young people, at kind of too said, in the high school. We have more kids in the high school that go to jail and arrested and given a record in the high school that we do not know about because they don't report it or keep records, so they say. And we still trying to push to get those records. So we as a community, I think we need to start talking to each other, saying more than saying hello and just, okay, I'm going to this one committee meeting. We are in a time now that it is difficult to do, but maybe we can find a way to have like these community block club. We can't have them now because you can't get together. So maybe we should start having community block clubs and things uh, through Zoom and for people to start talking to each other and sharing ideas and things. Because that's when we are a community and we are building our community and we make our community valuable. I'm off my soapbox now. So, and what and like Bessie says, as you get older, you get wiser, and like if there's people that that's there that can say, Okay, oh, you need to go to the police. Oh, I saw what happened. Do you want to report it to the police or you want to talk about it? Talk about it. And if you need to go to the police, they can go with them. Because a lot of people are really afraid sometimes of reporting things to the police. So, but we can help change that. And the only way we can change that is start talking to each other and seeing each other as human beings and that they should be treated like I want to be. Okay.
There you have it.
So, and so are there any other question? I see we had, I don't know whether she's still online or not. Christine knows she put in comments in the chat, but she was part of the group when we met and stuff. And she comes in and out of the community to work with things and stuff. And she have come back to work with the CNP on the thing to learn about sexual assault here in the community and in the school system. So we got to plan our next meeting and to educate people about what is sexual assault, what do you have to do in everything. And there is a organization here, um, has an office here in town, and so they uh, do community meetings and stuff. And so we can trying to schedule them to come out and talk to the group and stuff. And
All right.
okay, you know,
I think
there
that,
any more?
I
Huh?
think that will be it for the night, unless there's any other questions.
Yes, I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we're talking about the police and getting nasty people, people who really are not qualified to do the job in the way that community policing is involving people who can balance priorities in terms of when to use force and when to, I mean, until we get a system that allows for a social worker at least to take a different type of approach. And I've seen officers like that. And in terms of people who are not able to operate that way, I've seen an officer that way too when I was trying to resolve something with my neighbor. I think the psychological profile is part of policing, and the city does policing. And the city policing, in my case, or my personal experience, has been sort of not as good. And they're empowered with the powers of the police. So I think they should have psychological profiles, like inspectors also with regard to code, so that they are able to communicate and avoid bad situations by asking questions of the person that's being accused of doing something before it escalates into something bad.
Yeah. Yeah, like Matt Mitchell just mentioned in the chat, the idea of licensing police officers is something that's come up. The idea of putting more qualifications on the job of being an officer and being able to filter out the bad ones so they can't go town to town with the clean slate every single time.
I'm referring to staff. I'm referring to staff with police powers, and
Like the health department.
The police department the water department was given additional duties and given police oversight over it. And Ike Obo had the code enforcers under him, and now they've been transferred out of human services into what do you call planning, was it the community development group?
Okay.
And but they're the same people. And so in terms of of enforcement, anybody who's there enforcing code, whether it's the water department or whatever, they should all be profiled so that they're psychologically balanced in the sense of not not like being able to offer alternatives instead of looking at enforcement as their job, as opposed to trying to find solutions and work with people.
Absolutely. If you're going to have police powers, you should have a higher level of qualification. Just
Thank
plain
you.
and simple.
And that's not being asked. So that's something that could be directed to the council, actually,
Yeah,
or
it's
the city
something,
manager.
I think it's something to bring up at the December city council.
Thank you.
No, it's a great idea. Thank you.
Um, like I was looking at the questions and things in the chat room. Uh, um, the last one, I hope to
Yeah,
surface opportunity to support the
Carolyn
use
wants
of
us to highlight
311.
she wants us to highlight and promote the use of 311 over 911 as a great way to reduce police interactions and threats to the community, excessive policing. And yeah, I think that's ultimately what we want to go towards, is we want to reduce the scope of policing. Just like Chief Cook said, if the community only wants police officers to chase bad guys and murderers, that's what he'll do. So we as a community have to raise our hands saying, that's what we want you to do. We only want you to do that. And we need to build those alternatives. So talking as a community to identify these alternatives, figure out how we as a community can work together to build these alternatives to policing. It's key. And it's also education. It's letting people know the dangers that come with calling the police.
Right. And with the 311, you dial 311 and you tell a person what your problem is and everything. And you got to do a better job of people. If the phone rings on your desk, pick it up and do not let it go to voicemail. Because then the 311 operator is left with, oh, I have to then contact the police to have them to go out if it's a situation. But if you pick up the phone at your desk, it might never hit that. So we kind of need everybody to look at what and how we're doing things. And then we need to make sure that the 311 are better trained and know where to direct people and stuff. But that's what any with any community and stuff. And we're getting more questions now than we had from. Did she ask one? Oh, so Crystal, we'll be talking and um we will be doing and looking at some of the information and stuff that you are posting in reference to the FCC approval of the 988 to be three-digital number for, oh, okay. That would help too, because if you got to do 10 numbers, you just might stop and go ahead and do it. So I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening and sharing with us and the community that of people that came. Um, Good conversation. Hope you come back again. We will be posting this on our YouTube site. So you can share it with your friends if they did not come and be looking for our date we have for the third quarter transparent report. And we do have the monthly meetings for educational things. So really haven't seen what that one would be. And we might need to do. We haven't did it, but it's at the end of the year. Do the 10 rules for dealing with a policeman. We might have more young people to look at that because they are home and stuff and everything, and can get them involved in it and to see what they have to say and stuff. So with that, I hope everyone has a pleasant Thanksgiving. I know they encourage us not to have all of our friends and family over, but just think of it. This year, I have a small Thanksgiving. Next year, I can have a big one. So, thank you.
Please be safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank